Chapter 5. I sit for a moment in stunned silence. The thought of searching for all the beads has never even crossed my mind. Evelyn and I turn and look at each other, and our eyes widen with excitement. Is it possible? Could we do it? But how? Where would we even... Ev and I both start talking at the same time, then collapse in nervous giggles, relieved by the change of subject after the emotion of hearing Emma's story. Dylan interrupts our laughter, rolling his eyes and scooting back from the table. Come on, guys. We gotta go. And I'm not driving you out here again, so if you're going to look for more beans, you'll have to find another driver. Evelyn doesn't budge from her seat. Fine, we'll find someone else. She crosses her arms with a look of defiance, even toward the big brother she idolizes. Anyway, we'll both have our driver's license before the end of the summer. We'll ride our bikes if we have to, I say, crossing my fingers behind my back in the hope that it won't come to that. Chelsea and I would help, Emma says, and I breathe a sigh of relief. We could bring the beads to you, or even just put them in the mail. Chelsea chimes in. Yeah, we'd definitely help. But first we have to figure out how you're going to find more beads. That's easy. I've helped advertise for our school plays, after all. We'll put up flyers, I say with a shrug, and we could even put an ad in the newspaper. Chelsea nods her head. We'd post a flyer here at the restaurant. Emma agrees. They'd put one up at the grocery store, too, and we could put them all along the main street. It's settled, then. We'll try and find the rest of the beads. Dylan's waiting impatiently, so I start to slide out of the booth, but then I stop and look back at Evelyn. What if we could find them all? Do you think there could be other stories like Emma's? She raises her eyebrows and says resolutely, Well, there's only one way to find out. When we leave the cafe, Chelsea and Emma feel like old friends, even though we've just met, and they're older than we are. We exchange hugs and agree to be in touch soon. I've got both their phone numbers and email addresses safely stashed in my pocket. Evelyn and I are both giddy with excitement. As we drive home, Evelyn sits twisted around in her seat next to her brother, and I lean forward in mine, gripping her headrest so we can talk more easily. Still awestruck by what we heard, we can't stop talking about Emma's story. Whose voice do you think it was? I ask. Well, duh, it was the Blessed Mother's. Evelyn responds. The Virgin Mary? No way, I object. Maybe it was Grandma. Unexpectedly, Dylan chimes in. I'm with Evelyn. I've heard stories about people smelling roses when they've had mystical experiences. It was Mary. I touch the 2 rosary beads now hanging on my chain. So you think Emma's bead has some sort of special link to the Mother of God? I don't know about power, but there's something special about it, Evelyn answers. You know, she could have just been imagining things. Dylan, ever the skeptic, adds, Maybe Emma knew on some subconscious level that the bead was from a rosary. Maybe that, along with the really scary accident, made her dream up the rose smell and the woman's voice? I think for a moment. Then, no, Ev's right. There's something special about these beads. My bead drew me to it. This bead saved someone's life. There's something going on here, and the only way we're going to figure it out what it is or why is to find more beads. Evelyn and I spend the drive home chattering excitedly about what we should say on the flyer and in which newspapers we should place the ads. As we get closer to Evelyn and Dylan's house, though, there's one discussion we all know we can't delay any further. Evelyn finally raises the topic. So, I think we have to tell our parents. I respond instantly. No way. Do you know how ticked my mom will be? We drove all the way out to Danville and lied about it. She'll ground me for life. Dylan agrees. I'm not getting in trouble for your little scheme. I was just helping out. You can't turn around now and fess up. I don't know about grounding for life, but we'll get at least a week for sure. And I, for one, have plans this weekend. I love my cousin. She's the very best cousin a girl could ask for. But when she decides to adopt her perfect angel routine, I'd gladly trade her in for somebody else. Right now is one of those times. Evelyn sits back in her seat resolutely. Well, I can't keep lying to my parents. I'm sorry, but if you want my help going forward, we'll just have to tell them. I groan in frustration. I do not want to do this alone. Well, okay, I wouldn't be alone. Chelsea and Emma have already said they'd help. But doing it without Ev? Fine, I say in a low growl. Then when no one responds, I say it louder. Fine, we can tell them. But next time you want to play Miss Goody Two-Shoes, please let me know ahead of time. Dylan doesn't give her a chance to respond, but pounds the steering wheel. Last time I do you two guys a favor, you'll never have any fun if you can't figure out how to keep a few details from your parents every once in a while. Evelyn lets out a loud laugh. Ha! Yeah, look where it's gotten you. Every time you try and lie to Mom and Dad, they figure it out and you wind up in trouble. And in fact, it seems to me that you just got this little puppy back a few weeks ago, she says, running her hand over the dash of the car. Thanks for your advice, big brother. I'll learn from your mistakes. We may have lied, but we're ending it here. Lies on top of lies will only make the problem, and the punishment, worse. If we come clean now, they'll appreciate our honesty, and hopefully won't be too hard on us. Evelyn looks back at me with an angelic smile, batting her eyelashes, but her expression turns a little bit sick as she outlines her plan. We'll tell them the truth, and you're right, we'll probably be grounded. So I guess it's a good thing that Chelsea and Emma volunteered to put the flyers up, because I don't see us getting out much for a while. Call me a wimp, but I don't want to tell my parents by myself. I know that my mom had to run Gwen to softball practice and Paul to baseball. So when we get back to Evelyn's house, I call her and ask if she might be able to come pick me up after she drops them off, figuring she'll come in to talk to Aunt Susan. That way, Evelyn, Dylan, and I can all stand before judge and jury at the same time. My mom tends to be stricter than Aunt Susan, so I'm also hoping that Aunt Susan can talk her down from her first instinct on punishment, which will surely be grounding me for life. Evelyn and I hole up in her room to wait for my mom's arrival, and an eerie silence hangs over us. I open up Lord of the Flies again and pretend to read, but I cannot concentrate. I literally feel sick to my stomach as I think about the discussion that's coming. Finally, we hear my mom downstairs, calling for me to come down. We stop by Dylan's room, where Evelyn pokes her head in the door to let him know that it's time, and the three of us slowly descend the stairs. Mom and Aunt Susan are standing in the kitchen, talking. Evelyn clears her throat and begins our confession. Mom, Aunt Teresa, we need to talk to you. The two women give each other a look before looking back at the three of us. Aunt Susan glances at Dylan, clearly a little surprised that he would be involved in something Evelyn and I have been up to. All right, well, let's go to the living room where we'll be more comfortable, Aunt Susan suggests, always cool-headed and an excellent hostess. We walk into the living room. Mom and Aunt Susan take the two brocade armchairs, while Dylan, Evelyn, and I stand in front of the fireplace. I stare down at my hands, feeling like I should do the talking, since I got us into this mess. But where do I begin? We didn't really go shopping today. Mom and Aunt Susan both raise their eyebrows and wait for me to say more. A moment passes as I try to think about how best to tell the story. I think we were doing this for Aunt Liz spin is probably best. We drove out to Danville, to the restaurant where we ate on Saturday after the memorial service. I can see that Mom is getting a little ticked. Caitlin, you lied to us? You know how serious this... Yes, Mom, I know. I didn't want to. Well, we didn't want to. I'd look at Evelyn and Dylan. But we really didn't know enough of what was going on to feel like we could tell you about it. I gush on. Something strange happened. When we were in that field on Saturday and everyone was praying the rosary, I walked over to a wooded area. Only I didn't just walk over there. It was like I was drawn there. I didn't know why, but once I started, I just had to keep walking that way. What does this have to do with the lying, Caitlin? Mom's eyes flash with a combination of fear and anger. Let me tell you the rest, I blurt out, then collect myself and go on. Once I got to the trees, there were a whole bunch of little purple flowers mixed in the grass. You know how Grandma loved flowers, right? Well, I looked down, and there was something shiny nestled in the flowers. I picked it up, and do you know what it was? I paused as if they were going to answer. It was a bead from Grandma's rosary. It was my bead. KMR, my bead. Aunt Susan gasps. Mom's hand flutters to her mouth, and I continue. That's why I was in the trees for so long, and why it took me so long to come back to the car. I just couldn't believe it. So we went to the restaurant, and the girl who was working in the gift shop, her name is Chelsea, saw me looking at it. She asked me what it was, and I told her. Then it got even weirder. Chelsea told me that she had found a bead just like mine, outside the restaurant, one day a while back. She gave it to her best friend, Emma, because it had her initials on it, EML. Mom sinks back into her chair and closes her eyes. Aunt Susan reaches over and grabs Mom's hand, and I see her eyes fill with tears. Grandma may not have been Aunt Susan's mother, but I know she misses her as much as the rest of us do. I watch, letting the information sink in before I continue with Emma's story. Aunt Susan is the first to speak. Liz, it's Liz's bead, right? Evelyn interjects. We tried to call her last night to see if maybe she could take us over to get the bead from Emma and to hear Emma's story, but she never called us back. Aunt Susan looks startled, then guilty. Oh, Ev, she did call. She beeped in while I was on the other line and I forgot all about it. I'm so sorry. I just forgot about it. It's okay, Evelyn answers. Dylan took us. None of this really explains why you lied to us, Mom says. I know, my shoulders sag. But first, can I tell you the rest of the story? I add hopefully. Mom crosses her arms and gives a short nod. The look on her face, though, makes it clear to me that she doesn't really want to hear any more. I restart the story anyway. So when Chelsea told me about the bead, she also said that her friend, Emma, thought the bead saved her life. At first, I wanted to get the bead back because it was from Grandma's rosary, and I thought Aunt Liz would want it. But when Chelsea said the bead could have saved a person's life, I just had to know how. Again, not an acceptable reason for lying. Why didn't you just tell us, Mom persists. I wish I could shrink away and avoid this whole conversation. This is the last thing I want to talk about, especially in front of Aunt Susan, Evelyn, and Dylan. I stare at my hands to avoid looking her in the eye. You've been so different since the plane crash. You're so sad and mad all the time. I glance uneasily at the others in the room, not wanting to share secrets, but let's face it, everyone has seen how she's changed. I'm not saying anything that everyone doesn't already know. I steal a glance at my mom's shattered face, then look back down at my hands. I was afraid you'd tell me no, afraid you'd tell me that it was silly and I was wasting my time. So I didn't tell you. And I didn't tell Dad because I knew he'd make me tell you. And I asked Evelyn not to tell anyone either. I looked at Mom again and blinked back tears. I'm sorry. Mom stands. Clearly, I've said too much. Kate, we'll discuss this further at home. It's time for us to go. She says a stiff goodbye to Aunt Susan and stalks from the room out to the car. I start to follow, keeping my face down so they don't see the tears that are now streaming down my face. But I haven't fooled Aunt Susan. She walks over and gives me a hug. Kate, it'll be okay. She keeps her arms around me, and my tears quickly soak into the fabric of the top that she's wearing. You'll see. Maybe this is just what your mom needs. Maybe it'll help her. She puts her hands on my shoulders, gently pushing me away so she can look straight into my eyes. Kate, You need to pray. Pray for your mom, and I will too. She gives me another quick squeeze and lets me go. I nod to Aunt Susan and mumble goodbye to Evelyn and Dylan before I grab my backpack and head out the door. Mom's sitting in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel with the engine running. She doesn't look at me as I climb into the car. She puts the car into gear, backs down the driveway, and we drive home in stony silence.